Good morning, ladies and James, and welcome to my live stream. I thought I would have a look at something that occurred to me yesterday when I was watching a video on Facebook that I think it's called the Daily Wire, and it was using a sort of round table format in which they were discussing a variety of issues, political and otherwise, and making a lot of assertions. And yeah, it was these four guys, and Prager of Prager University was there. So I'm pretty sure there's Ben Shapiro is the main guy, and they were talking there about the fact that as white people, they have a certain experience. I know that Ben Shapiro is Jewish, and this guy with the bald head is Jewish, and the guy in the back with the beard is a professed Christian, and the guy on the right, I don't know what he identifies as. I know Prager identifies as Jewish. So it was strange to me to hear these three Jewish men, at least three, talking about the difficulties that arise from reconciling statements about white people as white people. And I thought that in some sense, generally speaking, Jewish people don't identify as white, or that there is some kind of a complication. They are white, but they are Jewish. And as the Jewish part, they don't participate in the blame that comes from being the instigators of the Native American genocide. They don't participate in the slave trade because most of them identify as immigrants who arrived in the 20th century after all those bad things happened. And it seems to me that it's hard to differentiate between the white people responsible for Native American genocide and the slave trade of the 19th century, and those who identify as recent arrivals to America who had no part in those historical travesties. So this is a live stream. It's the first time I've ever tried to do this, and it seems to me that I need to just keep talking and try to not have too many silent moments, which is very difficult for me. So anyway, that was what sort of struck me as something to talk about now, is to what extent is it fair for these men to identify as white when white includes Native American genocide and the slave trade of the 19th century. So this got me thinking. They were also talking a lot about JUDEO-CHRISTIAN values, and a moment ago, I was sort of surfing the web and came across various people talking about why it's false to claim that JUDEO-CHRISTIAN values are the foundation for what we now call the Western world. And someone like Shapiro was shown in a video making that claim and saying that it all begins with the Ten Commandments. That is sort of where civilization begins, Western civilization, in this Judeo-Christian tradition. And I have a little trouble seeing how one can lump together Judeo and Christian if I assume that the Christian was a reaction to the Judaic. And I know that from a historical perspective, it's easier to lump those together because Jesus was Jewish and he was responding to the tribal influences that he was experiencing and the values within that community. You can't have Christianity without having the Jesus story, which takes place in that setting of Judaism and the tribe of Judea, or whatever it is. But I think it's still problematic because in some sense there was a rejection of Judaism. We have an Old Testament and a New Testament, and they're sort of lumped together, and it's one story. And I often see Christians quoting from the Old Testament as if that should be taken at its word, as that's the word of God, etc. And I'm very confused about these claims, and I'm sure different sects of Christianity have different opinions on this. There are hundreds of groups with their own unique opinions, I imagine, within Christianity. But I don't think it's as simple. I don't think it helps us to simplify the matter to such an extent that we lump the Old and the New Testament into one set of values. And certainly I don't think it's of value to give over the origins of Western identity to a Judeo beginning. That doesn't seem accurate to me. So just in surfing around, I thought I could find something kind of interesting. And instead I found that it's just old news. A lot of people are making claims about it, but their main concern, their main complaint, I think, is the fact that it's unfair. That these are mainly atheists, Christopher Hitchens types, Dawkins, who do not want Western society to view themselves as a product of religious foundations. They want to completely reject and remove any religiosity from the picture, to say that something along the lines of, I saw a quotation, I don't remember from whom, and it said, Western civilization progressed despite Judeo-Christian values, not because of. So that's, for the most part, I see that kind of complaint. I don't see many people complaining about the term itself, lumping together the Judaism and Christianity. And more than likely, the only people who would be complaining about that would be anti-Semites, who want to remove the values from the fundamental values of the West from the Judaic and focus on the Christian. I think what's confusing about this term Judeo-Christian is that these two ideologies are at war, as I see it. They are fighting presently for in America for kind of American consciousness. They are trying to win over the American people with sets of values, and they are competing. They are competitors. And in that competition, which sort of reached its peak around the 1960s, the Judeo side began to win and has pretty much completely taken over the field. I would say 90% of the rhetoric that we get in the media, and certainly most if not all of the leftist point of view, the point of view of the left and progressives, etc., the anti-Trump people, even Hillary Clinton and her feminist point of view, and this trying to get a black man into office or a woman into office and as a sign of progress, which it seems is a kind of absurd claim. All of this is kind of reflecting, I think, the Judeo side, the Judeo values, which are not consistent with the Christian values. So when I see Ben Shapiro and his crowd talking about Judeo-Christianity and so on, I'm confused. I wonder, to what extent is Prager, for example, actually campaigning for a certain point of view? Once again, to get those, And not that this is a conspiracy. I think it is, but not that it has to be a conspiracy. It's just people with different values trying to recognize or to find or to locate their own sense of what is true and good within the principles of the government under which they live. So I thought I would try and look at and the etymology. Etymonline is a really good source oftentimes, but because you can find where it's first spoken of Judeo-Christian, but unfortunately I don't see. They don't have any reference to Judeo-Christian in its beginnings intellectually. Who was the first one to talk about Judeo-Christian? Unfortunately, they don't have it. That's really, I don't know where else to look. I'd like to see who coined it and when they began to speak of it and in what context, and then get a sense of how this idea progressed in the previous 2 or 3 centuries. I imagine people have been saying Judeo-Christian for some time. This gives no, Judeo entry gives no, Judeophobia, I bet that's a new one, from 1881. I guess I'm suffering from that. Islamophobia, that's probably very recent. Islamophobic, 1997. It's about Islamophobia is attested in 1877 in English and by 1914 in French. Interesting. That's interesting because I've always assumed that this phobia idea was kind of a manipulation from the 1990s when they started to, like homophobia. I doubt there was a lot of use of this term early on. So 1971. Fear of men in 1908. Interesting, right? Earlier it was just a fear of men. Now it's a fear of gay men. So what was merely a fear of male humans became a fear of male gay humans. Well, that's too bad. I guess we're going to have to look, and I hate to do this, but we're going to have to look at Wikipedia to see what they suggest as to its origins, if they suggest anything. Because I don't trust Wikipedia at all. It's very much if just bear with me. We'll say that there is this battle waging between Judeo and Christian. Okay, just as a hypothetical. And in that battle, there are 2 sides, and one or the other side is going to have more influence in various oracles of information. And Wikipedia is what you could call an oracle of information at this point. And I would say, from all of my experiences with Wikipedia over the past decade, it's definitely the Judeo side is winning over. And the categories that have been invented by the Judeo side, like anti-Semitism and so on, and the ways that we look at racism presently and sexism in particular, following from Jewish intellectuals, Wikipedia is definitely more Judeo than Christian. So Judeo-Christian is a term which is used to group Christianity and Judaism together, either in reference to Christianity's derivation from Judaism, both religions' common use of the Bible. Actually, that doesn't seem accurate, does it? Because the Bible includes the New Testament, and both religions do not use the New Testament. So the Bible in this reference is merely the Old Testament, or due to perceived parallels or commonalities and shared values between the 2 religions. The term first appears in a letter from Alexander McCall, which is dated 1821. In this case, the term referred to Jewish converts to Christianity. Now, that's interesting. I find that very interesting. The term was similarly used by Joseph Wolff in 1829 in reference to a type of church that would observe some Jewish traditions in order to convert Jews. Okay, that's interesting. Use of the German term Jewish Christian is, in a decidedly negative sense, can be found in the writings of Nietzsche, who emphasized what he believed were neglected aspects of continuity between the Jewish and Christian worldviews. Hey, Nicholas. So, I don't know, you can hear me okay, right, as I'm talking? I've heard today from the school where I teach that they're not going to be opening it anytime soon. So I'm going to have to start teaching online, and I was thinking maybe I could test this out to see how it works. I've been live for 15 minutes. You guys aren't answering me. So Nietzsche used it to emphasize what he believed were neglected aspects of continuity between the Jewish and Christian worldviews. Okay, so he was trying to reconcile ways in which this one historical moment shared certain values and aspects, qualities in common. The concept of Judeo-Christian ethics, values in an ethical rather than a theological or liturgical sense, was used by George Orwell as late as 1939. That's the modern usage, the Judeo-Christian scheme of morals. That's what we hear conservatives talking about so much now. Which is part of the reason that they have such a strong sense of protecting Israel, I think. They think of Israel as a kind of Christian land. The birth of Christianity occurred in that place, and so it's sacred, and they don't consider the fact, which I certainly do, that it wasn't Israel, it's Palestine, and it's, in my thinking, it's still Palestine, and it's one of the worst tragedies historically of the previous 100 years, certainly the worst of the previous 100 years, and certainly worse than what they call the Holocaust, far worse. I don't think nearly the number of people, Jews, died in the Holocaust as they claim. I think that's political nonsense. And I think based on those great numbers and that whole narrative, Palestine was stolen from a people who identified that as their land and who shouldn't have been pushed around like chess pieces. The myth of the Judeo-Christian tradition questions the theological validity of the Judeo-Christian concept and suggests that it was essentially an invention of American politics. So here's a Jewish guy, Arthur A. Cohen, who wrote a book called The Myth of Judeo-Christian. Second generation Americans. They have not published his first novel. So Why I Choose to Be Jewish was one of his essays. So he doesn't like to see it. This is a Jewish person who doesn't want to see these two distinct traditions lumped together as one. It seems to me that the Jewish tradition loses little by references to Judeo-Christian, because the Judeo remains what it was and what it's ever been, and the Christian is kind of swallowed up in that remaining, in that more established foundation. The foundation is unchanged, and Christianity is kind of the foam at the top of the pint, swirling around and eventually evaporating, but the main part of the pint that we want to consume, the Judeo, is unchanged. Jewish responses, the Jewish, very small, right? This is a really small Wikipedia entry. I'm surprised at how small it is. Intergroup relations. The rise of anti-Semitism in the 30s led concerned Protestants, Catholics, and Jews to take steps to increase mutual understanding and lessen the high levels of anti-Semitism in the United States. It's exactly as I suspected then. This term, Judeo-Christian, gained popularity as a political movement to ward off anti-Semitism in the United States. All this stuff I've been saying in my videos about a kind of strategy among Jewish peoples in the United States has all been connected to the idea that it's their responsibility to avoid another Holocaust because they are so outnumbered. And if the majority of non-Jews in the United States suddenly decided that Jews were bad, the Jews would be in a very bad position. Sort of like me now in China. If Chinese people suddenly decided Americans were evil, I'd, probably be lynched in the street or something. In this effort to ward off anti-Semitism, precursors of the National Conference of Christians and Jews created teams consisting of a priest, a rabbi, and a minister to run programs across the country and fashion a more pluralistic America, no longer defined as a Christian land, but one nurtured by three ennobling traditions. The phrase Judeo-Christian entered the contemporary lexicon as the standard liberal term for the idea that Western values rest on a religious consensus that includes Jews. It's just politics. It's presented, at least it was to me in the university, as just a kind of historical fact, a completely innocuous phrase that had nothing controversial about it, that was a historical truth. But I think it's far more sinister. It's a manipulation of my thought, is what this term is setting out to manipulate my thought. The scriptural basis for this new positive attitude toward Jews among evangelicals is found in Genesis 12:3, in which God promises that he will bless those who bless Abraham and his descendants, and curse those who curse them. So that's a scriptural basis found in Genesis, in which God promises that he will bless Abraham and his descendants, in which case Christianity is in some vague sense a descendant of Judaism. So the Ottoman Empire has a lot of interesting history with a lot of problems that have happened over the last 50 years. Promises and betrayals, Britain and the Holy Land. Yes, that's true. So I think the scripture basis is kind of ridiculous, don't you? You wouldn't say that these Christians are descendants of Abraham. I know Muslims assume that Abraham is just another prophet. Jesus and Abraham are prophets in the long line of prophets that ends with Muhammad, which was, again, I think the story that Muhammad told was a political movement. It was a strategy, a political strategy to bring together all these warring tribes in the Middle East and around Mecca. Muhammad knew what he was doing, I think. Other factors in the new philo-Semitism. See, now I would think philo-Semitism gets some bad reputation. I personally have used it a lot, but in a negative sense, sort of mocking the non-Jews who call out people like me as anti-Semitic simply for the fact that I want to make sense of these warring factions. I want to see how I'm being manipulated. And I have to speak of Jews and Judaism and that whole nest, what do they say? Rat's nest of conflicting stories. Just as, when Ben Shapiro and his pals on this Daily Wire thing are talking about how difficult it is to reconcile the stories about white people as white people. They're speaking as white people, and yet they identify as Jewish. I'm completely confused. I've run out into the wilderness now. I'm out off the beaten path. I don't know what they're doing. It seems to me, once again, in the same way that they created Judeo-Christian as a political movement, as a push to create a kind of a political point of view within the United States. So when these guys get together and are seated with Prager in particular, this guy's really up to, he's really trying to influence America's self-perception through his videos on what he calls Prager University. As if, I wonder what degrees that guy has. Probably not a PhD like moi. But when they're talking about their opinions as white men, I think there's something up here. This is politics. These guys are pushing the political. Anyway, other factors in the new philo-Semitism include gratitude to the Jews for contributing to the theological foundations of Christianity. Isn't that such a ridiculous idea? Gratitude to the Jews for producing Jesus, who rejected his Jewish identity. I'm sorry, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. That's my interpretation of the Jesus story. He rejects his Jewish identity, which is something I think all Jews should do. Personally, I think if you're not a practicing member of Judaism and you say that you're an atheist Jew, I say, come on, just stop it. Stop being Jewish. There's no such thing as an atheist Jew. What are you even talking about? Some kind of a bloodline? Some genetic legacy? No, man, no. And what, you're going to be white also? Come on now. It's too much, because you gain so much political leverage just by mention of your identity as a Jewish person. And then you want to be an atheist Jew and to be equal in kind to a practicing Jew, a non-practicing Jew, and then reformist Jew and so on. It's not the same as having all these different sects of Christianity, because it has such a political influence in the instant that you claim your Jewish identity. Just given all the the politics of ethnicity and minority politics, etc., it gets too complicated. It's impossible to pin down what we're even talking about, and yet it has profound power over how we think and what we can say. I can't pin it down what it is, and yet I'm not allowed to speak of it. And yet I hear about it all the time. I watched yesterday, I just stumbled on this Daily Wire thing. It was on Facebook for some reason. They had a live stream going on Facebook, and they were chatting away about Trump and the various candidates, as Ben Shapiro will, and Prager, and they were talking about these issues while they were seated there as, people who identify as Jewish, and throwing out these terms and references as if we share something, a worldview in common. But I don't share their worldview, and nor should I. I don't think non-Jews should accept the Holocaust narrative. There's so much that non-Jews should reject, in my opinion, that places them in an entirely different sphere. And that's where you can really see the evidence in the fact that if I say these things now on this video right now, there's a likelihood, if I gain any popularity at all, if YouTube sees my channel, they will just delete me. They will call it hate speech. So the extent to which I cannot say these things places me in a very different position from anyone who identifies as Jewish, who can say so many different things about Christians and so on. Christopher Hitchens did not need to be a non-Jewish. He could be Jewish and say all of those things against Christianity and against religion and still maintain a Jewish identity. A Christian who goes against religion, it's a complete contradiction. I'm just ranting now. I want to look at this. Other factors in the new philo-Semitism include gratitude to the Jews for contributing to the theological foundations of Christianity and being the source of the prophets and Jesus, remorse for the church's history of anti-Semitism, and fear that God will judge the nations at the end of time on the basis of how they treated the Jewish people. Oh my God, it's just madness. Moreover, for many evangelicals, Israel is seen as the instrument through which prophecies of the end times are fulfilled. Yeah, that's scary, scary stuff. Scary stuff. Philo-Semitism. Judeophilia is an interest in, respect for, and appreciation of Jewish people. Within the Jewish community, philo-Semitism includes an interest in Jewish culture and a love of things that are considered Jewish. The concept is not new. It was arguably avowed by such thinkers as Nietzsche, who described himself as an anti-Semite, although he also criticized the Jewish people. Allophilia. So my point of view is very different on philo-Semitism, as I guess I've made clear. I think that people who wag a finger, point a finger at others and say, anti-Semite, anti-Semite, silence him, remove him from the platform, remove him from his job, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Anti-Defamation League, and millions of people in the United States who don't identify as Jewish, but who are quick to dismiss and consider evil those who are named anti-Semite. Anyway, I'm getting tired. I have no idea how this is working out. I should look at it. Thank you for visiting. Well, it's not, you can't be late, P and B. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just opened it up. Thank you for coming, guys. Thank you for dropping in. Maybe I'll try this again. I have no idea. Ciao, Pascal.